Today, I'm going to talk about the history of brothels, gambling, bootlegging, churches, and cemeteries in Galveston, Texas. I call Complete Breakdown Galveston Vlog Part 2. Do you want to learn what it's like to live, work, and play on Galveston Bay? Well, boy, are you in the right place. People contact me every day who are relocating, ready to retire, looking for a vacation home or short-term rental, and I love it. I love sharing my love of Galveston Bay with you. Are you ready to learn to live like you're on vacation every day? Well, stay tuned. Galveston Island is a small barrier reef on the Texas Gulf Coast. Galveston Island has so much to offer that I'm going to give you the complete breakdown in several videos. So let's get right to it. Please like, subscribe, and click the little bell, and you'll be notified each week of my new videos on what it's like to live, work, and play on Galveston Bay. I'll give you tips, tricks, and tour neighborhoods. I'll show you interesting things to see and do all along Galveston Bay. Prostitution has long been a part of the Texas social landscape. Galveston has had prostitutes from its very beginning, dating back to the 1830s. Galveston of the past is starkly different from the amazing cruise and tourist destination we know and love today. Did you know that in 1929 there were 55, that's right, 55 houses of prostitution on Galveston Island, offering employment for about 900 ladies of the evening. For many, many decades, prostitution and gambling were openly allowed by Galveston city officials. As I've mentioned in my other videos, Galveston has had many monikers because of the island's acceptance of corruption. It was also known as the Free State of Galveston, the Island of Illicit Pleasures, Sin City of the South, and the Open City. More than 4 dozen brothels lined Post Office from 25th to 29th. This formed a district known as the Line. Research shows prostitution first came to Post Office Street during the Union occupation during the Civil War. By the 1890s, the Red Light District, or the Line, on Post Office was a clearly defined district. A story is told that in one of the brothels, the Oleander Hotel, the madam there took pity on a young homeless boy. Now, this young man's name was Jack, and the fostering madam let Jack live in a closet. In return, Jack would be in charge of sweeping, waxing floors, or running errands for the brothel operation as needed. So, as the story goes, the patrons of the Oleander Hotel would often enter from a back alley of the Oleander, and they would be escorted up a set of stairs that led them to a drawing room. Now, in this drawing room is where the ladies of the evening were, and they were anticipating their next clients. It is said that the madam would often lock young Jack in the closet near that drawing room during business hours. From that closet, it is storied that Jack listened to Blind Man Bill play the piano, who was there to entertain the clients of the brothel. Locals tell stories that the sheriff appeared every week for his bribe. In my research, I found a lifelong Galvestonian by the name of Frank Cantieri. Frank was quoted as saying about Galveston in the Free State in the 1940s and 50s that Galveston in those days was pretty wide open and the cops were all getting their payoffs. Now, each of the 25 plus rooms in the Oleander literally had red lights hanging over the door. This red light being on signaled when the room was being used. A local author has a great book out named Galveston's Red Light District, A History of the Line by Kimber Fountain, available on Amazon, and also does a fantastic tour. Check out the author's Red Light District tours online. The photo shows penciled numbers visible on the wall of the room were tallies of the monies earned by one lady of the evening. Fountain's book showcases the Oleander Hotel and its current owners. The Oleander sits in the 2500 block of Post Office, and this was storied to be the busiest part of the Red Light District during the Prohibition era. It's been said that Mother Harvey's was the premier house of flesh on the island. and it's set on the same block as the Oleander. Many of the more than 50 brothels are no longer standing. The prostitution market flourished and became an important part of the economy on the island. Mary W. Rimmers, in her short study of Galveston prostitution, Going Down the Line, writes that in 1940s, houses of prostitution earned between $15,000 and $20,000 a week. After Mayor Herbie Thanks-A-Million Cartwright was elected in 1947, he said, "If God couldn't stop prostitution, why should I?" Even reformers supported the oldest profession. A grand dame of the island's Kempner family, Ruth Levi Kempner, ran for office as a reformer. Ruth made a trip to Washington, D.C. during World War I to ask the government to ease up on an anti-prostitution policy that hurt bordellos catering to soldiers and sailors. The story goes that during her campaign, she paid a visit to see one of her red light district madams, who was named Big Tit Marie. It's written that Kempner was standing with Marie in front of a bunch of reporters, and Kempner said, "But for the grace of God, I would be in one of your houses. I believe people in your profession have a place and have always had a place in our civilization, and I'll do everything in the world I can to protect you." Well, you know that Kempner won the red light district vote and the entire election that year. Marie's support probably boosted her popularity, and she was the very first woman elected to the city's governing body in 1960. If you have a comment or a question, I'd love to hear from you. Just comment below. Now, I'm only going to talk about my favorite Jean Lafitte for just a minute because part 3 is dedicated solely to Lafitte. Anyway, legend has it that Lafitte was forced to leave New Orleans. Lafitte and his gang of privateers made their way to Galveston, and legend says that Lafitte and his men loved the Karankawan Indian women. The Karankawan Indian women surely weren't upset that the privateers would come to Galveston, adorning them with attention, expensive jewels, and gifts. The story goes that the Karankawan men had had enough of Lafitte and his men and ended up fighting them off the island. Ultimately, Lafitte and the Indians disappeared as the Mexicans took control of Galveston in the 1820s. The Downtown Gang was one of 2 gangs that controlled the organized crime world in Galveston, mostly during Prohibition. Now, the gang was started by Johnny Jack Nunes around 1920. The gang became a large profiteer and leader in the Galveston's crime syndicate. The Downtown Gang operated nightclubs, gambling establishments, and speakeasies all along the island. The Downtown Gang was the rival gang of Ollie Quinn and Dutch Voigt's Beach Gang. Now, the story goes that before Prohibition, Quinn and Voigt controlled all of the gambling on the island. The Downtown Gang and the Beach Gang decided to use Broadway to set the boundaries for their established territories. As Prohibition approached, Jack looked for a partner and found a boy from Houston named George Musey. Now, Musey was a Syrian and was truly a boy. He wasn't even old enough to drink yet, but like Nunes, he was here with his immigrant family. As the Roaring Twenties thundered in with incredible excess, the gangs began to rake in a profit with bootlegging as their primary source of income. Among the 2 gang suppliers were schooners, and they came from the Bahamas, Jamaica, and Cuba. And boy, the money was overflowing from the nightclubs and the speakeasies the gangs owned downtown Galveston. The gang was making more money than ever, and this inspired the gang to buy extravagant clothing, fancy cars, opulent houses, fine food, and liquor. The Downtown Gang sold bootleg hooch, and they had connections from New Orleans, Louisiana, and as far north as Montreal, Canada. Now, every now and then, as gangs do, for business purposes, they would negotiate and do deals together. Dutch Voigt would bring some guys and go on rum runs with George Musey. But if that business deal seemed shady or too good to be true, they would surely start fighting and a war would be declared between the 2 gangs. Now, Nunes ended up serving time in a federal prison, and Musey was on the run from the law in its story that he went to Canada. Now, the downtown gang was in trouble. A man named Big Jim was appointed as the leader, and Jim ultimately betrayed the downtown gang by giving the beach gang shipments Musey had scheduled for the downtown gang. Legend has it there might have been a woman involved between the two men. Who knows, it could have been ignorance, greed, or the woman. After Big Jim's betrayal, Fatty Owens took control of the gang, and less than a month later, a shootout transpired between the downtown and the beach gangs. Members of each gang died in the shootout on Tremont Street. Now, with Nunes in prison, Musey hiding in Canada, and Big Jim's betrayal, and Fatty Owens' court trial, there was nobody there to take the lead of the downtown gang. Stories show that with all the chaos, it's probably likely that George's younger brother, Fred, stepped up to the plate as the acting boss of the downtown gang. After Prohibition ended, the long-running organized crime gang fell apart. They operated some nightclubs, and they continued with the gambling operations, but it eventually came to an end around the mid-30s. Allegedly, George Musey was assassinated by order of the beach gang's successors, the Maceo Syndicate. It's written that the Maceo Syndicate took over much of the island and carried much more influence and power than the Nouns Musey mob ever achieved. The downtown gang just didn't have the strength like they did back in the old days and eventually disbanded. Jack Nunes would go on to make a living operating nightclubs and restaurants in Galveston. Please like and subscribe and click the little bell, and you'll be notified each week of my videos on what it's like to live, work, and play on Galveston Bay. I'll tour neighborhoods, and I'll show you interesting things to see and do all along Galveston Bay. The Balinese Room was an infamous nightclub in its heyday, with a pier stretching out 600 feet perched over the Gulf of Mexico on the seawall. For many decades, it operated as a dance hall, nightclub, and an illegal casino. But let's talk a little bit about the history of the beloved Balinese Room. The Balinese Room was run by two well-known Sicilian barbers from Louisiana who came to Galveston in about 1910. Their names were Sam and Rosario Rose Maceo. The Balinese Room was once known as the Maceo's Grotto. The Balinese Room was an exclusive nightclub spot in the 30s and the 40s. I can remember my family talking about the incredible stories of the infamous Balinese Room. Members of this private club included Howard Hughes and many wealthy oil men from Houston. Entertainment for the private club included the crooning Frank Sinatra and comedy stars like the Marx Brothers, or my favorite growing up, Bob Hope. Oh, and how can I forget Mr. George Burns? But now, back to the history of the infamous Balinese Room. The Maceos took over Chop Suey. Now, this was a teeny tiny restaurant at about the intersection of 21st and Seawall. The Maceo brothers opened a restaurant named Maceo's Grotto at that same location. Maceo's Grotto was one of many entertainment spots that could be seen on the Galveston seawall around 1929. You'd also see bathhouses and dance clubs, and some of those venues were illegal casinos. In about 1932, the Maceo's Grotto was then renovated into a Chinese restaurant called Sui Ren. Now, this building was built, and later the brothers added a 200-foot pier over the Gulf of Mexico. Now, this made this restaurant club a convenient choice for the guest in one of the city's most exclusive hotels, and one of my favorites today, the Galvez. We now know it as the Grand Galvez. But after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, that Oriental-sounding name was replaced with a more tropical-sounding name, the Balinese Room. The Maceo brothers not only changed the name, but they also updated all of the interiors. Now, the Maceos further extended that pier out to eventually 600 feet. The Balinese private back room was equipped with the most innovative gambling devices of the day. A little Balinese Room lore. Bartender Santos Cruz allegedly invented the margarita for singer Peggy Lee in 1948. He apparently named it after the Spanish version of her name, Margarita. And whether you like yours frozen on the rocks, with salt or without, fancy or traditional, margaritas have been a big hit ever since, no matter who invented the drink. Now, the Balinese Room's alleged illegal gambling made it a hub for mob action. The story is told, and it's pretty well known, that the casino at the far end of that 600-foot pier was operating in defiance of the law. But since the brothers had many cronies in local government and on the police force, charges were really never filed. I suspect there were lots of folks being bribed. The sheriff of Galveston County at the time was called before the Texas legislature to testify about why that club had remained open, knowing that there were illegal activities going on at the end of that pier. Well, the sheriff so responded, "I am not a member of that private club, so I could not get in." In about 1956, Will Wilson was elected as a Texas Attorney General after he campaigned to close down Galveston, its illegal casinos, and prostitution. He promised he'd be using the Texas Rangers to achieve this task, and the Rangers indeed set up shop at a nearby hotel. And they raided the casino often. But as my grandparents often told the story, their efforts were foiled time and time again by the length of that pier. The old-timers called it the Rangers' Run. By the time the Rangers ran down to the tail end of that long, narrow club to reach the casino, card tables, cards, chips had magically disappeared into secret floor and wall pockets. It was so frustrating for the Rangers as the band would strike up the song, "The eyes of Texas are upon you," to alert the staff and the patrons of the Texas Rangers' arrival. At first, the Rangers attempted to disrupt the illegal gambling business. They just sat in the casino all day, every day. Now, those customers were obviously intimidated by the Rangers' presence, and the business did suffer, but it stayed open. Eventually, though, the Rangers launched an undercover operation. The club finally closed its doors the end of May 1957. An investigation of the Maceo brothers' activities became much more intense, so Sam and Rose moved their empire to Nevada. Thanks to Sam's previous business dealings, the brothers became major investors in a hotel named the Desert Inn. Now, we all know the Desert Inn opened in 1950, and it was the largest and most elaborate casino on the Vegas Strip at the time. The brothers transferred controlling interest of their Galveston empire to the Fertitta family. The Fertitta family had business interests around the island, but they never had the influence that the brothers had experienced on the island in their heyday. Prostitution slowly started to wane in Galveston, and in 1957, with that crackdown by the Texas Attorney General on gambling crusades and against the sex trade. This crackdown lasted well into the 1960s. In 1997, the Balinese Room was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. But sadly, the Balinese Room was totally destroyed in 2008 by Hurricane Ike. The view behind me is of the Balinese Room Pier, where our beloved Balinese Room once stood. Want to check out the Balinese Room for yourself? Look for a movie called Night Game. This movie was made in 1989. Also, you could find an excerpt of Texas's own ZZ Top's Balinese. Now, an excerpt of this ZZ Top song can be heard in the 1993 movie Dazed and Confused. There are an abundant number of churches on the island, more than 50 of all denominations, including 2 synagogues. I'm a lover of architecture and history, and I'm going to talk about a few of the many important architectural places of worship today. In 1892, Sacred Heart was the largest church in Texas. It was also the 3rd largest in the southern U.S. But just a bit of history on this beautiful property. The church was established in June of 1884 by Right Reverend Bishop Nicholas Gallagher. Gallagher decided the east end of Galveston would become the Society of Jesus. Reverend John F. O'Connor was granted the task of setting up this parish in Galveston. With the help of Father Sleven, Sacred Heart had its first Mass the same day he arrived on Galveston Island, July 15th, 1884. The land Sacred Heart sits on was donated by Menard, one of the founding fathers of Galveston. Oh yes, this building was designed by my favorite Galveston architect, Nicholas J. Clayton. The beautiful property features ornate octagon-shaped towers, arches, flying buttresses, and beautiful lavish ornamentation. The design has influences of the Moorish, Gothic, Byzantine, French, and Romanesque styles. The Great Storm of 1900 destroyed the original building. As you probably know by now, this storm devastated most of Galveston and has been known as the worst natural disaster to ever hit the U.S. Just 2 stained glass windows, a mass bell, and the statue of the Sacred Heart, along with the crucifix, were demolished. These items still remain in the church to this very day. That Catholic parish family of Sacred Heart immediately began plans to reconstruct the church, and in 1903, a cornerstone was laid and the church was dedicated January 1904. The building's original dome was damaged during the 1915 hurricane and was redesigned by Nicholas J. Clayton. Sacred Heart was noted as a recorded Texas landmark in 1981. St. Patrick's Catholic Church is so beautiful and certainly worth visiting. I don't know if you could notice, but yes, this beautiful church with the amazing Gothic spire is designed by my favorite architect, Nicholas J. Clayton. A little history on my favorite architect. Clayton was a native of Ireland, and he immigrated to America with his widowed mother back in the early 1840s. Not only did he design this beautiful church, but he was also a parishioner. Father Odin boarded a schooner from New Orleans to the Texas coast, arriving on the island in 41. Father Odin found a community of eager Catholics ready to build a church for their small yet growing congregation. Since St. Mary Cathedral was the first Catholic cathedral in the state of Texas and the original Diocese of Galveston, which encompassed the entire state, St. Mary's will always be known as the mother church of all of the Catholic dioceses in Texas. St. Mary Cathedral was named a Texas State Historic Landmark in 1968 and a National Historic Landmark in 1973. The Broadway Cemetery Historic District covers an area of about 15 acres. That's a 6-block collective of 7 totally separate cemeteries. The architectural styles displayed in these cemeteries run a gamut of late 19th and early 20th century revivals, Beaux Arts, Colonial Revival, Italian Renaissance, Late Gothic Revival, and Classic Revival. Galveston was hit hard with 9 yellow fever epidemics during the period between 1839 and 1867. This necessitated additional public burial sites. At the time, it was the largest city in Texas and was the seaport of entry for the entire state of Texas. It's estimated, though, that in 1853, 60% of its population was affected by the yellow fever crisis, with a death toll of over 520 people. The island's last yellow fever epidemic in 1867 killed hundreds. With the onset of that health crisis, thousands fled the island. Legend has it, and one resident who stayed behind remembered that the victims died on the island like sheep. If you get an opportunity, you will see an amazing and vast assortment of monuments, vaults, and stone markers. They range in style. Some are extremely simple, just marble and granite headstones. Others are a sight to see with impressive Classic Revival vaults, Gothic Revival mausoleums, and towering obelisks. I love cemeteries, and we visit cemeteries whenever we travel. These surviving memorials really show our attitudes in our culture towards death, and it shows our burial practices of previous generations. I love the design and layout of the cemetery complex itself. I love the tombstone decoration, the symbolism, the artistry, and the inscriptions etched in each monument. This cemetery remains a rare surviving example in the great state of Texas. The Broadway Cemetery Historic District was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in June of 2014. Galveston Island's history documents her resiliency. Like a rising phoenix, she's risen out of the ashes as a beautiful yet quaint city that we all know and love. Pirates, wars, Spanish flu, yellow fever, hurricanes, gambling, bootlegging, prostitution, prohibition. Galveston is so much more than a cruise or tourist destination. Well, there you have it, y'all. Galveston Vlog Part 2. Please stay tuned for Galveston Vlog Part 3, Living on Galveston Island with Pirates. You don't want to miss, as I'll talk about my favorite pirate, Jean Lafitte. I'll talk about his time on the island. I'll visit neighborhoods, nature preserves, and memorials, all named in his honor. Are you ready to learn to live like you're on vacation every day? I hope you found some great information on this video and that you'll check out my other videos. If you're thinking about moving or relocating, make sure you reach out, give me a call, shoot me a text, send me an email. However you want to get in contact with me, I've got your back when moving to Galveston Bay. If you like the video, please hit the subscribe button, and click the little bell. You'll be notified every week about my new videos on what it's like to live, work, and play on Galveston Bay. Now, I know you like the video because you're still here. I want to give you my free Galveston Bay relocation guide. Just click on the link in the description below. There, you can download my free Galveston Bay relocation guide. You can register for real-time property listings, along with tips, tricks, and helpful information about everything real estate. Till next time.